when the sky is high. No reason to stay around. Pick your wings and you can touch and fly.
Hello and welcome to the Aviatrix Book Review. I'm Liz Booker. My guest today is an author, a financial research supervisory analyst, a distance runner, a certified chocolate taster, a pastry school student, and a commercial multi-engine rated general aviation pilot and aircraft owner. Her memoir, Postcards from the Sky, is the Aviatrix Book Club discussion book for August 2021. You can find her on Facebook at A Girl and Her Plane. Erin, Seidemann, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
I am so excited about this book. It was so refreshing. For anybody who has not had a chance to read it, can you share a little bit about it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So it is a memoir, so it is all 100% true. It's part travelogue, it's part relationship blog, but the underlying theme is an absolute love and addiction to flying.
Yeah, that is obvious in the book, clearly, but there are so many things that I love about it. So first of all, like I said, it's very refreshing, like a nice change of pace from all the books that we've been reading this year. I was very careful about making our reading list very diverse in terms of genre and types of aircraft and types of flying, but yours is the only one that exclusively focuses on general aviation. I think it's inspirational because for you at 24 years old to have your shit together so that you could buy your own plane to get through your training, I think that is an incredible option for somebody who has the means to do it. And then it's so relatable because, like you said, everything in it's true, and you include all of the bits about, you know, the kind of relationships that you were having at the time and how those impacted your life. And that's what women are doing in their 20s. And so I just think this is a super relatable book for any woman, man or woman of any age, but especially young women, you know, as they're going through that experience. And those of us who are older, looking back, we could certainly relate to that period of life. So I think it was awesome. Can you tell me what you were hoping to accomplish in publishing the book? I know you mentioned at the back of the book, people were like, "Oh, you have so many stories, you should write a book." Is that the only reason you did it?
That was what first got me thinking about writing it. You know, when you go flying and you come back and you tell your friends about where you've been, or even just a short trip, something strange that happened. So many people, every time I came home, said, "Erin, you really need to write a book." And I've always been a writer. My degree is in English writing specifically. So I've written down pretty much, you know, I always try to, like, if something interesting happens to me, I always try to write it down. But it's always been just for me. It is literally in a locked suitcase up in my closet. So I had never given any thought to actually putting it out there and in the world, and especially, you know, with the relationship parts in it. You know, when people would tell me, "Erin, you really need to write a book," I'd say, "Yeah, you know, now that enough of y'all have said that, okay, I'm going to, but I can't do it while my parents are still alive." There's a lot of this stuff that they are not going to like reading in a book. They didn't like, you know, hearing about it when I was going through the relationship. So, you know, I thought that I was going to be much, much older when I finally wrote the book. But I even had to talk with my parents. I said, "Okay, look, so, you know, I'm writing this book. There's some sex in it. And I know that you guys know, you know, by now that I do have sex. You know, my mom was in denial for quite a while. But are y'all going to be okay reading it?" And you know, my mom did kind of skip some parts. But she's also in a book club, so her friends told her about it. But whereas my dad is a lot more cool about just like, "Hey, as long as it's safe, as long as you're having fun, you know, you do what you want to do." And I totally forgot your question now. I just went off on a tangent and I don't remember the question.
It was a good tangent. I was just asking you like what you were hoping to accomplish by actually publishing the story.
Right. So once I did decide to write the book, and once I started sitting down to write the book, you know, it occurred to me that hopefully other people who have problems like mine, like with the motion sickness, will read this and realize that they can fly, because I remember reading Bob Hoover's book, and I have always admired Bob Hoover greatly. I do think he's the best pilot that anybody's ever had.
What's the title of the book?
His book is called Forever Flying. And if you haven't read it, I feel like there's some books that should be required reading for all pilots. His is one of them, Bob Hoover's Forever Flying, and Ernest Gann's Fate is the Hunter. Every pilot should read those. And if you haven't, leave right now. Turn off this podcast, leave right now and go buy those books. And okay, go.
I haven't read either of those. And you know what? You just gave me the idea to post this in the book club and ask everybody, what are your like required reading, and open it up to all books, because I think that's important for people to know.
Okay, well now you have my two, Forever Flying, Fate is the Hunter. But so I remember reading in Bob Hoover's book that he had really bad motion sickness. And now he was able to fully overcome his motion sickness. Unfortunately, I have not been able to fully overcome mine. I kind of got used to the movements of an airplane to the point that when I'm flying, I don't have it. Like, unless there was one time coming back from a trip, flying kind of the panhandle of Florida got really turbulent, like to the point, I'm hitting my head on the ceiling. Okay, I did start to get a little motion sick then. But otherwise, when I'm flying, I'm fine. If I'm sitting in the back of a commercial airliner and it gets turbulent, yes, I do still get motion sick. So I was never able to fully overcome my motion sickness. But I hope that other people who read this think like, okay, if she did it, I have motion sickness too. I can give it a try. At least give it a try, and not just with the motion sickness, but also with some of the things that you encounter as a woman in aviation. Some of them are great. Most of them are great, actually. Some of them are not so nice. And I didn't have these resources when I was a student pilot. I didn't know about the 99s or about women in aviation. So if I can provide that light for somebody that these things actually exist, then even if it's just for one person, I will be a happy author.
So, well, first of all, about the motion sickness, I also experienced motion sickness as a child, and I was in the Coast Guard and underway on ships as a ship navigator for several years, and I got seasick every single time we got underway. And going to flight school, this was something that I was very nervous about, because they have this machine there that we call affectionately the spin and puke, which if you are someone who is experiencing chronic air sickness in the plane and you aren't able to continue training, they'll send you there. And it's basically a cylinder that, they kind of turn all the lights off. You have sort of bits of a cockpit or some task that you have to complete. And you do a spin in it slowly so that they can demonstrate what vertigo feels like early in your training. But if you are getting sick, you get to go back for multiple rides. And I was like, no, please no. But I never got sick in the plane. I think maybe all my time at sea maybe desensitized me to it. That was probably my spin and puke. So I was grateful not to get air sick, and I never have flying for sure. So those of you who think you can't do this because of that, there are ways to work through it, and you certainly did it. I mean, you even did aerobatics, so.
I did them. I'm not going to say I did them well, but I did them.
Yeah, you did them. So the flying in the book is really awesome too, especially like the regions in which you flew, because those totally related to me, because I started my career flying in San Francisco, which was a really amazing area to fly in. I've flown across the country and of course done training on the Gulf Coast. That's where the Navy Pensacola is. And then I've flown all over the Caribbean. So tell me a little bit about the Bay Area and that experience flying out there for you.
As much as I knock California and the Bay Area, with its, shall we say, interesting people, it was truly a paradise for flying, except for the fog. Okay, the fog just sucked. But when you'd have a clear day, you have a little bit of everything. You have water, you have mountains, you have valley. It's beautiful. So I'm totally appreciate learning to fly around San Francisco. And they also say, if you've learned to fly in San Francisco, LA, New York, or Chicago, you can fly anywhere. And I totally believe that, because when I moved back home, it's so lax around here. We have the one international airport, New Orleans. And, you know, whereas San Francisco, you have San Francisco, Oakland, San Jose, and then all, you know, and those are Bravos and Charlies, and then you have all the Deltas. And so it's just the airspace issues around San Francisco are crazy. And to go from that to New Orleans, where there's barely any, you know, kind of few and far between, and really like the busiest places are offshore. So once you get way south of here, I really do fully appreciate learning to fly in San Francisco and the beauty of it. It really is a beautiful city and a beautiful state.
I totally agree with you. Our air station was right on SFO. So like I was thrown straight into the fire, getting in and out of Bravo airspace, flying in that fog quite a bit and under it. Like we would fly if we were going out on a rescue case, and depending what the weather was above, I mean, on my check ride, I flew under the Golden Gate Bridge, under the fog offshore to do my check ride. It's nuts. Yeah. So it is very challenging, but very beautiful. And you talk in the book about going out to Harris Ranch. When I was pregnant with my daughter, I was still flying for 5.5 months. And one of my buddies and I would get on the schedule as often as we could to do a training and remain over lunch out to Harris Ranch to eat steak. And you know, my friends said that they gained sympathy weight with me because they were always eating with me. But yeah, Harris Ranch is a really cool place that is really smelly, but you get your steak literally right off the cow, right onto your plate. It's awesome.
Yeah, you know you're there. You can close your eyes and know you're there because you smell it when you're flying over it. And all the controllers know that that's the only reason to go down there. You know, you'd be down there and when they'd cut you off and switch you to the local frequency, they'd say, "Enjoy your steak."
I know. I loved it. It was so cool. And then you tell the story about flying from San Francisco when you were moving back to New Orleans and that whole cross-country ordeal. I kind of related to that too. Tell us a little bit about that trip.
That trip will always have a special place in my heart for so many reasons. The total amount of time between San Francisco and Lakefront Airport, New Orleans, 16.1 hours in my Cessna 172 SP. So not a trip to be taken lightly. And my dad loves, he's not a pilot, nor is my mom, but my dad loves riding with me. And he joke, you know, when people ask him, "Oh, well, you know, do I let him fly the plane?" He jokes and says, "Well, she lets me control the heater."
That's great.
But he flew one way out to San Francisco to meet me and then rode back with me in the plane. And so, you know, it's always going to be special for me because of that, you know, because of the time with my dad. And, you know, we made some stops in places that I would probably never otherwise make a trip to: Goodyear, Arizona, Fabian, Texas, you know, these weird places that you've never even heard of that ended up having these charming things about them. And I also, you know, one of the things that I love about general aviation flying, you know, as opposed to commercial flying, is when you go to some of these small airports, you have no way to get around. And a lot of them have this wonderful, wonderful thing called a crew car. And it's literally just a car. It's usually a pretty beat up car that nobody wants anymore. But they have it for pilots to take and go have lunch or get to wherever it is they're going. And they just hand you the keys. And it's a wonderful kind of nostalgic thing. You know, I feel like it's the way things used to be, where people could trust each other more than they do these days. And to me, the crew car itself is always part of the adventure, because you never know what you're going to get.
That's so awesome. It would be awesome if somebody out there decided to, you know, post pictures of their crew car and just like have a little gallery of everywhere that they go and the different cars that they have. And then you flew in my stomping grounds in the Caribbean. You flew a single engine aircraft over there by yourself, which is crazy. I was flying, at least I had 2 engines and a whole lot of gear and training for being over the water. So tell us about that trip for you.
My first time flying to the Bahamas, there's now been quite a few because you can't help but fall in love with it. But my first time was in the 172 SP that's in the book, and the part about going to the Bahamas is also in the book. And it was my first time. I live on, well, now I live on the Gulf Coast. I live in New Orleans, so there's water all around you in New Orleans. It's unfortunately both beautiful and scary, given our knack for attracting hurricanes. But living around the water, you're used to being around the water, but I had never flown that much over the water to the point that you're out of sight of land. And the two most popular places to clear customs in the Bahamas, just because they're the closest, are either Bimini or Freeport, Grand Bahama. And both of those, they're about 52, I believe it's 52 nautical miles from Florida. So there is some time when you are not in sight of land. And, you read about it, you hear about it, your friend, maybe some friends have done it and they tell you about it, but it's totally different experiencing it. And, a lot of people talk about, once you don't see any land, you'll start hearing things, like you'll start hearing your engine hiccup when it really isn't hiccuping. And I totally had that. I had never had any engine trouble ever with that airplane, so there was no reason to suspect it, but your mind starts playing tricks on you. And that, to me, that kind of went back to always trust your instruments. So when I started hearing a hiccup, I'd look at my instruments and everything looks okay, so just chill out. It's just a crazy, it's just a crazy flying over water thing. But anybody who hasn't flown to the Bahamas, if you have your own plane, do it. If you don't have your own plane, get on a commercial flight, because I feel like they're underappreciated. You always hear about Bora Bora and the Maldives and how beautiful they are. And the Bahamas, I am here to tell you, because I've been in those places too, are just as beautiful, and they're way closer. I felt like, especially the first time, I kind of expect it now, but it still surprises me. But especially the first time that I flew there, when you're over the islands and there's the different gradients of the sand under the water and the different blues, I literally felt like my eyes were waking up, because I had never seen such beautiful colors. Like your painting that's behind you, it has a lot of blues. You think you see a lot of blues. The cover of my book has a lot of blues on it. But when you're flying over that water, I literally felt like I was waking up like in a rainbow. It's unbelievable. Highly recommended to anybody who has been there before. Go again. And if you haven't been, absolutely go.
Yeah, it's so true. So, so my first unit was San Francisco. So for 4 years, I was flying in that gorgeous scenery and gorgeous terrain out there. And then I came to Florida, and I was flying out of Opa-locka. And to be honest, after your eyes have been so stimulated by terrain and just the variety, when you come to Florida, the water's beautiful, but it's so flat, and it's a strange experience. But then the minute you get out to the Bahamas, it's just spectacular. It's so beautiful. So I totally agree. And how did you prepare for that flight? You talk about this stuff in the book, but I love hearing you talk about it.
No, you read about it like in AOPA, and if you guys aren't members of AOPA, it is totally worth the money. They have so many resources for student pilots, for experienced pilots,
and for rusty pilots,
yes,
by the way.
Yes, I have gotten a lot of my friends who flew 20 years ago back into it through the Rusty Pilots program. So AOPA is worth every penny and more. And they do have resources for people who want to fly to nearby countries, the Bahamas, Canada, Mexico. And they even have checklists that, to make sure you've covered everything. Now, mind you, my first trip to the Bahamas was before AOPA had all that stuff. So mine was really more from, you would read the stories in the magazine of people who had been there and some friends who had been there. But, even though I was in my 20s and fearless, really, and, invincible, I still prepared. I bought the safety equipment. I had there's a guy, I think he's in Alabama, who makes it's essentially like a fanny pack, but it is just packed full of survival gear. So I got that, so it can be on me, because you read those stories about people who they have to ditch or something, and the raft is in the back of the plane and they can't get to it.
Yep.
So, that's why I
Absolutely.
thought that fanny pack thing was a really good idea, because I can literally wear it on me. If I exit the plane, it is exiting the plane with me. So, I had the survival gear. I got one of those raft things, and I made sure that it was close by in case I needed it. And, so you do take all the precautions, and there is a lot. Like, it felt very overwhelming when I was planning for the trip, not just like where I wanted to go or when, and having to deal with that within a short time frame that I was able to get off work, but also the safety stuff that you need. So it was a lot, and it was overwhelming, but it was still completely worth it.
And that was, so this whole book takes place with your first plane, which you named Orion. And since then you've had some upgrades. Tell us about your plane ownership journey.
So I had Orion for just over 10 years. And, you hear people say that selling your airplane is the best day of your life. And that is so untrue. I cried my eyes out. I mean, because in 10 years of airplane ownership, you become attached to the plane. It becomes a personality, like a friend. And I hated to give up. I felt like I was betraying him by selling him. And I felt really bad. But, I also kept telling myself, hey, I had already bought a new plane. I'm like, you're going to make those same memories and maybe even better with this new plane. So just get over it. You'll be okay. So I had Orion for a little over 10 years. And then I bought a 1979 Piper Seneca 2, which is a twin engine. And I was not rated to fly a twin engine. So it was the second time I bought a plane, oopsie, that I was not rated to fly. So, but it was, I had taken another trip to the Bahamas in the Cessna 172. And for a couple of years, I had already been thinking that I wanted to upgrade to a twin, but I didn't know anybody who owned a twin. So I couldn't really ask them much. I had nobody to ask about it. But it had been in the back of my mind for a couple of years that I wanted the speed and the added safety feature of another engine. And I took another trip out to the Bahamas in my 172, and I met a guy who lived on Rum Cay. He was a ship captain. He would run cargo between Florida and Rum Cay because he worked for a developer that was building housing on Rum Cay. And he'd spend a little bit of time in Florida, but he was mostly in Rum Cay. And, that kind of pushed me over the edge to get the twin, because Rum Cay is really far out. I talked about Bimini and Grand Bahama that are about 52 nautical miles off of Florida. Rum Cay, you go over Nassau, you go over the Exumas, Eleuthera, Long Island. It's as far east as the Bahamas go. So there's a lot of overwater flying if you're going to be going to Rum Cay. And so, with this boyfriend on Rum Cay, I knew I'd be going out there a lot. And that was kind of the final straw of, okay, it's time to get a twin. So then I had the twin for about 5 years. And right before COVID shut everything down in early, 2020, I bought a Cirrus. I'd kind of gotten tired of the maintenance costs of owning a twin. I loved the plane. I really had nothing wrong with the plane. And it wasn't that I couldn't afford it, but when you're spending all your money just on the plane and pretty much nothing else, that might be a little too much. So I wanted to go back to owning a single, but you become spoiled with the speed of a twin. And so that really limited my choices of a single that was going to give me the same speed that I had with the twin. So I was looking at Bonanzas and I was looking at Cirruses, and finally settled on the Cirrus. And although I haven't flown as much, with COVID and also taking care of a sick parent, it's a wonderful plane, and I can't wait to fly it more. And I'm really looking forward to flying it more and getting to know it better and making those memories with the new plane.
You know, they say that you should surround yourself by people who are moving in the same direction that you want to go or who have already accomplished it, which is totally what I'm doing with this project because, you know, you're a published author and I'm writing and looking to get published. And I just got back from a trip to Seattle where I met up with a couple of our book club associates, Cecilia Aragon, the author of Flying Free, and Sherri L, who is very hospitable out there. And Sherri owns her own aircraft, and we jumped in and we took a spin, and she offered to fly me somewhere else. And Cecilia will have news when she's ready to share it. But and you own an aircraft, so I came home and I informed my husband that I'm getting a plane, which wasn't something I ever took very seriously before. And I have a long way before I'll be ready to do that. But what advice do you have for someone who is considering buying their own plane, and especially somebody young who is maybe trying to weigh the benefits of either owning it or continuing to do their training by renting?
My first bit of advice is, if it's going to be close, you know, if you kind of think you can afford it, might be a little close, might be a little tight, don't do it. Because there are always unforeseen expenses in airplane ownership. I mean, I'm talking thousands of dollars unforeseen expenses. And there's no way to plan for that. You really just have to have that natural cushion already in place. So it's certainly not going to come there after you buy the airplane. But on the other hand, if you know that you can afford it, and you know that you'll be able to fly it enough, you know, don't buy a plane if you're only going to fly it every once in a while, which unfortunately is what I'm doing right now, but that will change. But you know, if you know that you can afford it and you will be able to fly it enough, I'm the total opposite. I'm like, when are you going to go look at that plane? Did you get it inspected? You need to buy that plane right now. So, you know, just do your homework. If there's one takeaway from this, do your homework and make sure you can afford it. And then if you can, absolutely 100% buy the plane. Buy the plane, you won't regret it.
Okay, I'm gonna buy the plane. I just have to figure out which one first. And it'll be probably 5 or 10 years. Okay, so this book really, it has two storylines to it. It has the aviation part, and as you mentioned, you said you called it relationship blog. I call it kiss and tell. Why did you choose to include that part in your book?
So, you know, I do feel like as a woman in aviation, because that is, so we all know that that's rare. It's, you know, give or take about 5% of licensed pilots are women. And especially, I was in my 20s, I'm 41 now, okay, so a bit different. You can see all the gray hair. But I was in my 20s and I was single. And you have very different experiences as a young woman in aviation, especially as an airplane owner too. Once a guy would find out that I owned the airplane, you know, things got interesting. But you know, I think that that the story is a bit incomplete if you try to tell it as a woman in aviation and there aren't relationships involved. If you know, if you're single, if you're married, you know, okay, that's different. But you know, it really is inevitable that you're going to run into guys who want to date you or guys who think you shouldn't be in aviation, unfortunately. And you know, I think as women, we need to let other women know who are just getting into it that yes, unfortunately, some of this still exists. The fun does definitely outweigh the bad things, and that, you know, that's why we're all still in it. We wouldn't still be in it if the bad outweighed the good. But it is, fortunately or unfortunately, a very realistic part of aviation as a woman.
And you talked about some of the sort of negative attitudes that you got from guys in civil aviation. I was shocked by that, to be honest with you. I was someone who wanted to be a pilot since I was 5. I had parents who encouraged me. I never encountered anyone who even thought twice about me wanting to do that. They just, you know, there was just no indication that it was a thing until I got to flight school. And I was super surprised when I got on the social media groups like Female Aviators Sticking Together and Lady Aviators, and I started seeing all these stories, not just in the airlines, but in civilian aviation, where people are being like stupid. I mean, it's just shocking to me that that still happens. Like, and then when I was reading it in your book, I was like, really?
Yeah, I mean, 21st century people, let's catch up here. But yeah, I mean, unfortunately, we're still dealing with a lot of the same problems that Amelia Earhart did, and the literally the first women in aviation. Why?
100 years later.
100 years later, yes, exactly. And yeah, I like you. I grew up in a household where I was never taught that there were some things for guys and some things for girls. If you wanted to do it, you did it. And unfortunately, when I was a student pilot, I did not know about the 99s and women in aviation. So I didn't have those resources. And that's another reason that I have a list of resources in the book, because if that's the first thing that a woman reading this sees about it, and that makes her say, okay, there are these support groups for me, and maybe that'll push her over the edge to get into aviation, I will be completely happy, because I wish I had those when I was a student pilot, because unfortunately I encountered that negativity literally right off the bat. One of my first lessons, which I talk about in the book, and it was such a shock to me coming from a household where I didn't even know that was a thing. So, I didn't know if it was maybe something about San Francisco. It was a very different place that I was living in, from where I grew up in New Orleans. I really had no idea what to make of it. And that's why I didn't have any response to it at the time. I was just in such shock. And still, like, when I think about it, still, I still feel that shock. Like, are you kidding me? What did he just say? And then just not knowing how to process it or how to react to it.
Yeah, for me, it was a huge distraction. It's like don't fly like a girl, or just like stupid things that people say to you, and it continues. And what I do love are these support groups and the social media. I got to be honest with you, I think it's fabulous. All of the things that were happening to me, and I had no one who related to them, or not too many people that I had available to me to talk to about it. Now you can just go online and say, hey, this jerk said this stupid thing to me, and all of the ladies will chime in, and give you some encouragement and maybe give you ideas on how to handle it. And so I love that. It's a whole different world now. You are a Renaissance woman. I already listed off, a bunch of things in my intro about you, and then in the book you talk about bagpipes and fencing, and it just seems like you either have a big case of ADD, or you are just super curious about the world, which I totally think that, infinite curiosity is one of the most important traits somebody should have. So I think it's fabulous. Tell us what you're doing now.
So now I'm in pastry school. I was one of those, when you grow up in New Orleans, you are surrounded by literally the best food in the world. And I never cooked. My mom was never really a good cook. So, I didn't have that influence of a mom as a good cook. So I really never cook. I also work nights during the week. So I would go out on the weekends, get a bunch of food, and I would just live on the leftovers while I was working during the week. And, so cooking was just, it never entered into the picture. When I bought my condo here on Lake Pontchartrain, it has a really small kitchen. And I'm like, okay, no big deal. That's never going to be an issue. Never say never. Because about 4 years ago, I was going through a very stressful time, actually from a local aviation group that I was one of the officers in, and, just politics got really ugly. And I will use this phrase, ain't nobody got time for that, because ain't nobody got time for that. But I had put so much time and effort into it, it was really, really stressing me out. And I started baking. And I didn't know that this was a thing until, I was giving some of the stuff away to my neighbors so that I didn't get really fat. And I was coming back from a morning run one day, and I ran into my neighbor out walking her dog. And she said, Erin, you're stress baking. What the hell is that? I've never heard of it. What is that? She's like, well, I know what you're going through. You've told me about it. And you're suddenly doing all this baking that you've never done before. You're stress baking. I'm like, whatever. I don't even know what that is. Whatever. And I came upstairs to my place, and I'm like, she might be right. And she was, actually. So I thought, okay, once, and I did end up quitting that group. I figured, okay, once I got out of that, the stress baking would go away. But like aviation, it had then developed into a total obsession and addiction. And so it's still here to this day. And it's blossomed. I keep getting sort of more and more into it. I took a course in professional chocolatier. So I make bonbons and chocolate ganaches and stuff like that at home. And then after that, I got certified as a professional chocolate taster. Yes, ladies, this is a thing, a professional chocolate taster. And there are different levels of the certification. And once I got my level 2 certification, it qualified me to be a judge for international chocolate competitions. Man. And so what started out as stress baking has now turned into this complete adventure of I was traveling the world judging chocolate competitions. And if that's not living life, I don't know what is. And I'll take any excuse to travel. I don't even really need any excuse to travel, but this has to be the perfect excuse to travel. Oh, I'm an international chocolate judge. So it really has been an adventure, and I love it. But yeah, I'm always, you hear life is short, okay, you kind of believe it, but it has been driven home to me lately after losing a parent. And I have always been one of those people who I think because of my love of travel and seeing different things that are just completely unlike what you're used to, it's the same for me with hobbies. And that's what got me into flying and bagpiping. And when I was in middle school and high school, I was fencing. My dad used to say, like, hey, everybody else is doing football and baseball, she's over here fencing. So I have always been like that, and it's just there's just too much to see and do in our wonderful world. So get out there and do it.
And I just want to point out that you actually do have a day job. You're not like some trust fund baby just running around on adventure. Like, just to be clear for everybody, I that's how you afford the finances to own these aircraft, to take these trips, but I'm not sure how you work out the time.
I do have a day job. It's no secret that I've never really been enamored with it. So I've said since day one that I'm what's called a supervisory analyst in finance. So I do actually use my English writing background. I started out as a research editor, but I obtained over the many years, 5 professional licenses to be a supervisory analyst. So I still edit, but it's also the supervisory analyst part of it is you're reading each report for compliance, because financial reports, they all have to have certain elements, and then there's even more stuff that they can't say. And these are financial analysts who make millions of dollars, and they're not used to hearing no. So some of them don't take it too well. But I will say that, despite the heartache and the hours that I've put into it, it does afford me an absolutely wonderful lifestyle, and I would never knock that about it. But I'm also one of those people who really hates the term, when people see my plane or my condo or whatever, and they say, oh, that must be nice. No. Unfortunately, in the financial industry, it's known for a hazing when you first join, of expecting you to work 7 days a week and 16-hour days. And I was literally doing that to the point that, and this was even during my flight training. When I first moved to San Francisco, I got an apartment that was a 10-minute walk from work, so I wanted to be close to work. And the parking situation in San Francisco, that's a whole nother Zoom call for that. But I was working so much that there were many nights that I literally slept under my desk so that I would save that 10 minutes each way of walking, and I would get 20 minutes extra sleep because that's how little sleep I was getting. So, pay your dues like I did, pay those dues, and hopefully it will pay off in the long run.
Yeah, I'm the same way. Anyone who says, oh, it must be nice to have a pool in your backyard, like, well, you didn't see all the houses I lived in when I was enlisted in the military and moving all over the country. Like, I started my career off scrubbing toilets and scraping barnacles off of buoys. So, It take a lot of work to get here. So congratulations to you that you have done the crappy stuff and decided to use those resources to do fun things. That's wonderful and very inspirational, and hopefully inspirational for somebody who's in the grind right now, who's like, is this worth it? You know, make the time to use that money wisely. So you have all of these things that you've done. I want to know what's on your bucket list, both in terms of aviation and in terms of all these fun hobbies.
So with the aviation, you know, as somebody who doesn't want to do it for a living, I have my commercial single and my commercial multi, so I think that's, you know, that's about as far as I'll go. But I do want to do some of the fun ratings. Everybody who's gotten a seaplane rating says like it is the most fun rating you will ever get. So that's on the list, and I want to do it like someplace exotic too. You know, there's a place really close to here that that offers seaplane ratings, but that's just too ordinary. So
I just went for a flight in Seattle. It's the second time. I mean, you do have to hit the weather, like the time of year, but honestly, like Seattle seaplane flying is beautiful. It's busy, but it's beautiful.
Yeah, and you know, I was thinking like Vancouver because I don't usually love cities. They're just too busy and dirty, but I love Vancouver.
I'm sure you're onto something. Let me know when you're going.
Okay, all right, deal. Yeah, so fun ratings, that kind of stuff, maybe a type rating here or there, but yeah, I mean, I'm satisfied with the ratings that I have. And you know, I got the commercial. Obviously I don't need the commercial. I'm not flying commercially, but I got it, you know, I wanted to be a better pilot. And I hate to say it, but as a woman, I feel like we're constantly having to prove ourselves that, you know, that we do deserve this place here. And I think that kind of got me a little bit of street cred, you know, if anybody ever says anything, hey, I am commercial rated. Okay, stop that.
Yeah, absolutely. You've definitely ticked off a bunch of boxes and done so much with your own aircraft. Nobody should be looking at you sideways or questioning, you know, your ability or experience in doing this. Is there any place that you'd like to take your aircraft that you haven't been yet?
Really, the answer is everywhere. I mean, you know, I've literally been from coast to coast. When I moved from San Francisco back to New Orleans, and I've been to the Bahamas quite a few times. I also, a couple of years ago, I went and picked up a friend who's also a 99. I picked her up at Key West. She lives in the Upper Keys, but I picked her up in Key West. And then we flew my Seneca over to Belize, which I also highly recommend. Oh my God, Belize is so cool. It has so much amazing history, and the food is good, and it's a beautiful flight. So from the Key, you know, I could have gone straight down from New Orleans to there.
Yeah.
I think it's pretty much like due south. But picking her up meant that we flew right past Cuba. And that was cool. I got to talk to Havana approach. That was so awesome.
It is cool. That's so
you know, really, I mean, I hear about a place that somebody's flown to that is accessible by my type of plane, and I want to go. So yes, the answer is everywhere.
awesome. And how about your hobbies?
So, you know, right now with pastry school plus my regular job, I don't have time for anything else. But I'm literally halfway through the pastry program. It's a 15-month program. So next year, it'll be around my birthday when I'm done in May, when I'm done with the pastry program. I would love to. So music has always been a part of my life. I started playing the bagpipes when I was 13, and I played professionally for 5 years. And I played the bagpipes for about a total of 18 years. I don't play anymore. But I miss having music in my life. I think it's very soothing and very therapeutic. And years ago, I was on a trip to Trinidad, and I've always loved the steel drum. Who doesn't love the steel drum? It's a beautiful instrument. We call it steel drum. Over there, they call it pan or steel pan. And I made a point of going to the pan yards at night when they practice. And, you know, having a musical background, and also where I went to college, I took a lot of music electives. You would not believe the sound that they can get from a steel pan band. If I closed my eyes when I was there, I would not have known that I wasn't sitting listening to the Louisiana Philharmonic Orchestra practice. They were doing classical music, and it literally sounded like an orchestra. And it's just amazing. And so, of course, I'm very impressionable. You know, I see something like that, and I'm like, okay, I got to do that. So I bought a steel drum while I was there. And I didn't tell my parents, and they were it was on a commercial flight, so they were picking me up at Louis Armstrong here. We still call it Moisant. It used to be called Moisant Airport. So they were picking me up at Moisant, and of course they weren't at all surprised when I walked off the plane with this gigantic, about as big as I am, because I'm just under 5 feet tall, steel drum. So when I got back from Trinidad, I kind of learned a few songs on it. I got some sheet music. I had to write the notes in the pan because it's blank, and like the bagpipes, it doesn't necessarily go in a logical order. And I guess it will once I learn it better. But I wrote the notes on the pan so I can look at the music and then look at the pan and know where it is. And I taught myself a few songs, but that's next on the list after pastry school, is to really take lessons and learn how to play the pan.
Erin, you are so cool and so fun and so interesting. I totally want to come hang out with you in New Orleans. Oh my gosh. Do you plan to write any more books? I don't know how you could fit it in with all of those things that you want to do.
I do, and I have been writing a little bit. Literally, when this book ends, I started writing after that to kind of pick up from where that ends. But it's a slow process, because when I started this book, I already had all the stories; they already existed. And all I had to do was put them in a paper. A lot of them I already had on paper, and really just kind of made it. Like I said, I used to write just for myself, but translated that to writing for other people. So some of the writing is there, but it's going to take quite a long time, I'd say, to amass enough stories that are worthy of a book. I still take trips a lot. Well, pre-COVID, still take trips a lot, and I was still flying a lot until COVID and taking care of a sick parent. But to have enough stories that will fill a book, it takes a pretty long time. So the answer is yes, I'm working on it, but more interesting things have to happen to me. So please join the party over here and give me something to write about.
This is something that I always talked about, and I still do. There's like this balance as a writer, and I wasn't writing full time before, and now I am. And, I just took this week to go out to Seattle. And while I was there, I went for a ride in one of our book club members' planes. I went for a seaplane flight. I went wing walking, which is like bucket list item with Mason Wing Walking Academy. It was so awesome. But there's like this balance of like, the only way for a book to get published is for your butt to be in the seat writing it. But then, I'm old enough that I have plenty of experience and plenty of stories to draw from. But there's this balance of like, do I want to write or do I want to go live? So I have something to write about. Just trying to maintain that balance,
I'm a bit of an introvert. So I am at home a lot. So there is a lot of time to write. But, you're also like, okay, well, nothing's happening while I'm sitting here looking out my window. But I guess I hope that enough stuff happens while I do go flying. Or a lot of people have asked, am I going to do a book about chocolate or a book about pastry? And that's a possibility, or maybe all three. I don't know. I'll seem very ADHD, I think, if I do a book about all three. But it definitely is a balance. And then especially with work, and then over the past year and a half, taking care of a sick parent. There's a lot and you hear those stories a lot in aviation, that somebody started out, maybe they didn't quite finish their private license, or they didn't get to solo, and life got in the way. And, as much as I like to write, I also, like you said, you like to live, and it's a tough balance.
I know, it's a challenge. Erin, before we shift to talking about writing, I just wanted to say a huge thank you for this book. And if you write a sequel to it, we are definitely going to want to read that. So we'll all be lined up for what happened next in Erin's life and her adventures. So thank you so much for this. Thanks for joining us in the book club discussions, because that is super. Everybody loves that. So I appreciate it.
I always love book clubs. They're so much fun because they've read the book and they have good questions. I love book clubs. Anybody who wants to, call me.
Thanks so much for joining. Please join us in the Aviatrix Book Club next month, when we'll be discussing Open Skies, My Life as Afghanistan's First Female Pilot by Nilufar Rahmani and Adam Sykes. Blue skies, everyone.
And